Welcome to the Revenge Story Times channel. My name is Emily. I wouldn't say my life was perfect, but I would always be thankful, thinking things could be worse. I've been married to my husband, Michael, for 7 years. Most of the years I spent with him were good, especially the first few. But over time, I noticed he became more focused on work than on me. He stopped talking to me and asking about my feelings. Still, I did everything I could to save our marriage. Michael had a son from his previous marriage, Jason. He was completely different from Michael. When we first met, he seemed a bit distant, but over time, he became very close to me. Whenever we spent time together, he would always listen to me and try to understand me. This was something I had longed for. One day, everything changed. Michael went on a 3-day business trip. I thought I'd be home alone, but Jason unexpectedly knocked on the door. He had come back from college for a few weeks of vacation and wanted to spend time with his dad. When he found out Michael was at work, he said, "Then we'll hang out together," and came inside. We decided to cook dinner together. Everything seemed normal in the kitchen until I realized he was watching me. At first, I thought it was a misunderstanding, but then there was a moment when I couldn't ignore the different look in his eyes. That night, Jason and I had a long conversation. He usually talked about his dreams and plans, but that night, he shared something more emotionally intimate. He told me how distant his father had been towards him. At that moment, I realized that not only I, but he too felt lonely in this house. These feelings brought us closer. But in that moment, I understood just how thin the line between right and wrong could be. I knew I had to stop it at some point, but the things I was feeling only confused me more. Jason stayed in the living room until late that night. We started watching a movie together, but I don't really remember what happened in the movie because my mind was completely elsewhere. I could feel Jason looking at me in a different way. It made me feel both uncomfortable and strangely intrigued. After the movie, we started talking. While sitting there, talking to him made me feel more relaxed than I had in a long time. Unlike the conversations with Michael, where he was always talking about work or brushing me off, Jason was listening carefully to everything I said. Feeling understood was something I had really missed. Eventually, it got very late, and I told him he should go to bed. Jason looked at me for a moment and said, "Talking to you feels so good. Can I stay here a little longer?" Those words only deepened the emotional confusion I was already feeling. I agreed, and we sat a little longer, side by side. There was a moment of silence. Then Jason suddenly said, "You know, sometimes I realize how much I need to talk to someone like you." His voice was soft and sincere. I smiled at him and said, "It's nice to hear that. I'm happy you're here." But I hadn't thought about how my words might affect him. Jason looked into my eyes and slowly took my hand. "Maybe it's not right to say this, but I think you're really special," he said. In that moment, I was speechless. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to pull my hand away, but I couldn't. For a moment, I felt like my loneliness and the emptiness inside him had brought us together. I knew I had to stop this moment quickly. I gently pulled my hand back and said, "Jason, what you just said surprised me a bit. I think we all sometimes pick up the wrong signals." But even as I said this, I felt a heaviness in my heart. Jason said, "You're right. Maybe I went a little too far, but please don't misunderstand me. I have a lot of respect for you," and quickly stood up. "Good night, Emily," he said, and went to his room. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night. I was afraid to face my feelings for Jason. I didn't know where this situation would lead me, but somehow, I kept thinking about every minute I spent with him. The next morning at breakfast, everything seemed normal. Jason acted like nothing had happened the night before, but I was struggling to hide the confusion inside me. We kept our distance from each other throughout the day, but that didn't mean everything was over. When Michael returned home, everything seemed to go back to normal, but I knew something had changed inside me. That brief moment with Jason kept playing in my mind. I knew how dangerous these feelings were, but I couldn't control myself completely. The next holiday break, when Jason came home again, I didn't know what would happen, but somehow, I felt like this story wasn't going to end there. Months passed. Jason returned to his university, and everything at home seemed to go back to normal. But the confusion inside me never went away. I kept thinking about that brief moment we shared. Michael's cold attitude continued. He came home late from work, said only a few superficial words to me, and sat in front of the TV. We felt like strangers living in the same house. Eventually, I found out when Jason would be coming home again. It was university break, and he would stay with us for a few weeks. I was both looking forward to his return and ashamed of the feelings I had. But somehow, this anticipation kept me going. When Jason arrived, everything seemed normal, just like before. I could still feel the warmth in his eyes, but this time I was more careful. I was determined to keep the boundaries between us. However, things didn't go as I had planned. One evening, when Michael said he would be home late from work, Jason and I were left alone. We had dinner together, and then Jason asked, "Do you want to get some fresh air?" We went outside and sat on the swing on the porch. The air was cool and calm, and the stars were brighter than usual. After a while, Jason broke the silence, took a deep breath, and said, "Emily, being here always makes me feel good. You know that, right?" My heart started beating fast. Not knowing what to say, I just nodded. "My relationship with my dad has never been strong," he continued. "But you've always made me feel more than just family. Talking to you, being close to you, gives me strength." His words both moved and frightened me. A voice inside me was shouting that this was wrong, but at the same time, Jason's words affected me deeply. Suddenly, he turned toward me and looked into my eyes. "I can't hide how I feel about you anymore. This might not be right, but I can't stop myself," he said. His words cornered me completely. I stood up in that moment, took a deep breath, and turned to him. "Jason, what you're saying, it's putting me in a very difficult position. I'm your stepmother, you know this isn't right," I said. But even my words didn't sound convincing, because my heart was telling me something different. Jason said, "You're right, Emily, but I can't suppress my feelings. I don't want to hurt you. I just wanted you to know how I feel," and he stepped back. That night, everything became even more complicated. Jason was determined to give me space, but neither of us could ignore what was happening between us. His presence unsettled me, but at the same time, I felt strangely drawn to him. One morning, when Michael left early for work, Jason came to sit beside me during breakfast. After sitting silently for a while, he said, "Emily, I don't want to put you in a difficult situation, but these feelings are real. And when I think of you, I feel happy." I didn't know where this bond with Jason would lead me, but somehow, I didn't want to escape from it either. Everything changed after Jason expressed his feelings. We were now more aware of each other's presence than ever before, but this made me feel increasingly uneasy. Every day, deep down, I knew this was wrong, but I couldn't escape these feelings. One day, Michael came home early. Jason and I were having coffee in the kitchen when Michael saw us. He stared at us for a moment, as if he had sensed something, before asking with a mocking tone, "What are you two so happily talking about?" Jason quickly changed the subject, saying something casual, but the expression on Michael's face made me even more uncomfortable. That night, Michael unexpectedly approached me in the bedroom. He asked a question he hadn't asked in a long time. "Do you love me, Emily?" His voice was different, almost as if he were trying to suppress some suspicion. I hesitated for a moment, then said, "Of course I do." But even as I said the words, I wasn't sure how convincing I sounded. As the tension between Jason and Michael increased, the pressure on me grew as well. Jason sought every opportunity to talk to me and hinted at his feelings. Meanwhile, Michael became more suspicious. One day, things completely spiraled out of control. Michael had to go out of town for a work meeting over the weekend. The thought of being alone with Jason brought those complicated feelings bubbling back to the surface. As soon as Michael left, Jason came directly to me. "Emily, we can't ignore these feelings anymore," he said, his tone firm. "You know your dad doesn't deserve you. He always leaves you alone, doesn't listen to you, but I'm here. I'll always listen to you. I'll understand you." Jason's words completely captivated me. I couldn't respond. In that moment, I realized how confused my feelings had become. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt so understood and so alone at the same time. But suddenly, everything changed. I heard a car engine outside. It was Michael's car. He had returned home, having canceled his meeting. Panic set in. Jason immediately tensed up and retreated to his room. When Michael came inside, he looked around as if searching for something. "You look a bit down, Emily. Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice soft but tinged with suspicion. I told him everything was fine, but I was struggling to hide the tension inside me. That night, we each retreated to our rooms, but I couldn't sleep. I didn't know how deep Michael's suspicions were, but I knew he felt something was off between us. Meanwhile, even with Michael in the room, Jason continued to steal secret glances at me. With each passing day, this tangled situation between the three of us grew more complicated. I felt that this wasn't just between Jason and me anymore. Michael was becoming part of this confusion too. I didn't know where this would lead, but I could sense that something was about to break. Michael's suspicions didn't take long to deepen. His silence, careful glances, and sudden questions made me uneasy. Jason, however, continued to show his feelings for me, even when Michael seemed unaware. In this tense environment, I could hardly breathe. One evening, Michael organized a dinner for all of us. When Jason and I sat down at the table, Michael silently observed us. Finally, breaking the silence, he went straight to the point. "Emily, I feel like something's been off lately. Is there something you want to tell me?" The air was ice cold. My breath caught, and the words seemed stuck in my throat. But Michael continued. "Jason, you've been acting differently for a while. Something's going on here, and I want to know what it is." Jason hesitated, then stood up from the table. "Dad, maybe you should think more. Emily has always tried to support you, but you never even noticed," he said. His words shocked me. Michael, in turn, stood up angrily. "What are you trying to say?" he shouted. The tension between them escalated quickly. Jason accused Michael of neglecting me and not giving me the love I deserved. Michael, now fully aware of Jason's feelings toward me, completely lost control. That night, everything changed irreversibly. Michael demanded that Jason leave the house. "You will never step foot in this house again. Emily and I didn't end up like this because of you, but from now on, you have no place here," he said. Without saying a word, Jason packed his bags and left the house. In that moment, my heart broke. Losing both Michael and Jason deeply affected me. With Jason's departure, the house fell silent. But this silence didn't calm the turmoil inside me. Eventually, the bond between Michael and me completely shattered. As the days passed, our relationship grew even weaker. Despite his efforts to save our marriage, trust between us was lost. One day, I decided to file for divorce. When I told Michael, I saw pain in his eyes, but it seemed like he had been expecting it. He accepted it quietly. After the divorce, it took me a long time to recover. I never saw Jason again, but I heard that he moved on and was doing well. As I tried to rebuild my life, I realized that these events taught me a heavy lesson. Sometimes, following our emotions can lead to consequences that are hard to undo. Now, when I look back, I better understand the weight of the mistakes I made, but those mistakes made me who I am. I managed to move on from that dark period of my life, and now I experience the peace of knowing it's all over. Yes, for now I want to end the story here. The second part of this story, where I share much more personal moments, is even more beautiful and exciting. If you'd like to watch the second part, please subscribe. I'm sure you'll love it. Thank you for listening. Until the end, see you in the next episode of Revenge Storytimes. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Goodbye.